Hi, everyone. Welcome to our FAFSA walkthrough. My name is Kathleen Fenlon, and I am the Director of Financial Aid at Siena. I am going to walk you through all of the different questions that you will encounter as you are filling out the FAFSA. We know the FAFSA is a very stressful process, but we are hoping to make it as easy as possible today. So let's get started. So the first thing that you're going to want to do before you start the FAFSA is that your student will need to create an FSA ID. This will be the screen when you go to create an account. You will need an FSA ID for both your student as well as the parent that is going to sign the FAFSA. The FAFSA only requires that one parent sign it, so you just need an FSA ID for one parent. And if your student has gone to school in the past, if you have an older sibling of that student, you may already have an FSA ID, which you would just use for this. Your student, though, will probably need a new one if they're filling out the FAFSA for the first time. One thing I always share with our families, these are going to be really important to hang on to for all 4 years that your student is in college, because you will probably need to fill out the FAFSA each year. So start that college folder, get those FSA IDs written down, because no matter what school your student decides to attend, those FSA IDs will be important in the years going forward. All right, and then so this next page, right when you've figured out your FSA ID and you've inputted that for your student to log in, it's going to have you sign off that this is a federal government system and that you are just agreeing to that before you continue. And next, so it's going to ask you to tell them a little bit about yourself. If you've signed in with your student's FSA ID, which you probably have, you'll want to choose that you are a student and you want to have access to the FAFSA form. That is going to be the first box that you check as you're going forward. If you signed in with the parent FSA ID, then you would choose I'm a parent filling out the FAFSA form for the student. All right, and then you're going to be able to get started once you click that. If you are a freshman that is coming to college in the 2022-2023 school year, you are going to want to choose Start the 2022-2023 FAFSA form. Right now, there are two applications available. The 2021-2022 is for our students that are currently in school. So just make sure you're choosing that fall semester that your student is starting school. All right, and then you're going to start the form. So you want to create a save key first. This can be the season that we're in. It can be a pet's name. It's something easy that you'll be able to remember if you want to stop the FAFSA before completing it. All right, and then the first thing you're going to do is start to enter the personal information for the student. The first question is that it's going to ask you what their social security number is, and then it's going to ask you some further information, what their name is, what their date of birth is. Then it's going to ask for the student email and phone address. This is how the FAFSA will communicate with you, mostly via email. This is where they will send the student aid report to once you've finished the FAFSA completely. So make sure that this is this email address that your student has access to. This is also the email address that's going to get sent to the schools that your student is sending the FAFSA to. So important that it's one that they check regularly. And then student address. So this should be the student's permanent mailing address. You'll input all of that information there. All right, and then the next question that it's going to ask you is about the student residency. So it's going to ask, I'm a New York citizen, or New York resident, so it's asking me specifically about New York, but it will ask you about whichever state that you put down for that student residency. So it's asking me if I've lived in New York for at least 5 years. It will ask you if you lived in Connecticut, if that's where you have placed your student's address. And then it's going to ask you if you're a US citizen. The options are on this question: yes, I am a US citizen or US national. No, but I'm an eligible non-citizen. No, I am not a citizen or an eligible non-citizen. If your student is not a US citizen, it is worth it to reach out to the schools that your student's applying to see if you're going to need to supply some further documentation. All right, and then next, so this first question, what will your high school completion status be when you begin college in the 2022-2023 school year? For most students, if they're starting college next fall, it will be a high school diploma. If they have done some other, whether they have a GED certificate or if they've been homeschooled, those are all of the other options, as well as none of the above. So pick which one, depending on what your student will have achieved by the time that they start college in the 2022-2023 school year. The second question, what college degree or certificate will you be working on when you begin the 2022-2023 school year? So for this, if you're a parent filling it out for the student, again, when the FAFSA says you, they are meaning your student. And so for most students, it's going to be their first bachelor's degree. If that is the case for your student, input that there. And then it's going to ask again, will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin the 2022-2023 school year? For most students, this answer is going to be no. Most students do not have a bachelor's degree before they begin in that first year of college. And then what will your grade level be when you begin the 2022-2023 school year? The options are going to be that they attended college before and it's their first year, that they're a sophomore in their second year, junior in their third, or a senior in their fourth, as well as some graduate student options as well. For most students, if you are a high school senior filling this out, it's going to probably be that it's your first year. And then student selective service. So if you are a male student, you do need to register for selective service before you'll be able to receive federal aid. If you chose that you were male, it would ask you in the FAFSA if you wanted to register for selective service. They can then do it for you. If you're a female and you answer this question as a female, it would just project you into the next question and it won't ask you about the selective service since you do not need to register as a female. Student driver's license. So this will ask you what the student's driver's license number is. If you don't have one, you would just simply not put a number into there. And then student foster care and parent completion. Are you a foster youth or were you in the foster care system at any time? Again, this is asking about the student. So if that answer is yes, choose yes. If it is no, you would choose no. Then it's going to ask you what the highest school completed by parent one and parent two, if there is a parent two, was. The options for this are middle school or junior high, high school, college or beyond, or other unknown. So if you know which your highest school completed by your parent was, go ahead and input that in there. If you don't, you would choose the other/unknown option. Student eligibility worksheet. So this is going to ask, have you ever received federal student aid? If this is your student's first time going to college, the answer to this question would be no. If they've attended college in the past elsewhere and have received federal aid, those would be Stafford loans, a Pell Grant, federal SEOG, then the answer to this question would be yes. All right, and then you're going to want to add your high school. So as a student, if you're filling this out, if you choose what state that your high school is from first, you'll then put in the city. And then if you type in the high school name, it will start to generate some options for you based off of that high school. Click on that high school and then you'll be able to add it to this application. And then next, you're going to want to fill out the schools, the colleges that you want to receive your FAFSA. You're able to add up to 10 schools to this first initial FAFSA. If your student is applying to more than 10 schools, you will first add all of the 10 schools that you want the FAFSA to be sent to. You'll hit submit at the end, which we'll get to in a little bit. You'll let the FAFSA process. This typically takes up to 4 or 5 days to do. And once that FAFSA has been processed, you'll then be able to go back into this document, go to this question, take those 10 schools off of the FAFSA and add the additional 5 or the additional 10 or the additional 7 that your student is applying to and wants them to receive their FAFSA. From there, you'll then go through the rest of this form to go to the end and submit it again. Once a school has your FAFSA, they have it. It doesn't need to be sent again unless you're making actual updates to other questions on the FAFSA form. So you can either search your school by name, city, and state, or if you know the school's federal code, you can choose that tab and input it there. But the search box is pretty easy. I very easily added Siena. So next you can see I've added Siena. And it will give you then options to choose what housing plan that you're interested in at that specific school. So for Siena, the options are on campus, off campus with a parent, or off campus. And when it says off campus, it means living on your own. So if your student's going to live in an apartment off campus, not through the school, that would be the option. If your student is just commuting and is going to live at home with parents, it would be the second option, which is with the parent. All right, and then if you add any other schools on this first page, it's going to also give you the option to actually compare the schools. So at the bottom of this, you'll notice it says compare all schools. So once you've added all of the schools to the FAFSA, you can then click compare all schools, and it will give you the option to actually look at some information about each individual school and compare and contrast them. So you'll see I added SUNY Albany to that form. It gives you a little bit more in terms of the information about them, what their graduation rate is, what their retention rate is, what their transfer rate is. So it gives you some really good details about the schools if you choose to compare them. Next, it is going to ask you about student marital status. So again, this is for the student. Most students are going to come in and choose single, but there is also married and widowed and divorced as options as well. There's also the option of never married. And then it's going to ask if the student has dependents. So the question is, do you now have or will you have children who receive more than half of your support from you between July 1st, 2022 and June 30th, 2023? So this is asking if the student has any children of their own. And then it's going to ask if the student has any other dependents. So anyone that would live with the student and receive more than half of their support between now and June 30th, 2023. What's important about this is, again, it is asking about the student. We are still in the student section. So it's asking about any dependents or any dependent children of the student. All right, and then we're moving on to parent information. So this is where, if you're a parent filling out the form, you're gonna start to provide your information. So all the information before this is gonna be all about the student, with the exception of that one question about parent education status. So we're now moving on to parent demographics. So what information should I provide? So this is going to say my parents live together, they're married or unmarried. My parents are divorced or separated, and I live with one parent more than the other. My parents are divorced or separated, and I live with both parents equally. I was legally adopted. So these are the options. So if you choose one of these options, it will then ask you follow-up questions about the parent's situation that you choose. All right. And so then based off that first information, it's going to then ask you what your parent marital status is. The options are never married, unmarried and both legal parents living together, married or remarried, divorced or separated, widowed. If a parent, if both parents live together and are married, you'll include the information for both of your parents. If your parents are divorced, the questions will then ask which parent you live with more than 50% of the time in the school year that you're filling out the FAFSA form. So within the last 12 months, which parent have you lived with more? And if that parent is also now remarried, that new spouse would need to be included on the FAFSA as well. Once you choose married, so if that is your answer on this, there's also going to be some follow-up questions on this page that will pop up. The questions are going to be what the date, so what is the date of the marriage? It will be month and year. It will also ask you for the date of separation or divorce or the date widowed, depending on which scenario you choose. All right, and then you're going to start to answer some questions about your first parent. So they're going to ask questions about each parent individually. It's going to ask for the parent's social, first and last name, their date of birth, and also your parent's email address. Again, keep in mind, this is the email address that you're sending to the school. So this is what we'll use if we have questions on the FAFSA. If we think that something is incorrect on the FAFSA, this is the parent email address that we'll use as a follow-up. And then it's going to ask for further information about the other parent. So if you have two parents, it will ask you for information about both of them. Again, same information as they asked about the first parent. You can only provide one parent email address. So just, again, make sure that that's the email address that you want to provide for the school to be able to be in contact with. All right, and then parent state of legal residence. Again, since I filled out in the beginning that I am a New York State resident, it's going to then ask me if my parents are also legal residents of New York. If you were filling this form out in New Jersey, it would ask you that question. All right, and then we're now focusing on children that parents have. So it's going to ask how many other dependent children do your parents have that will rely on your parents for more than half of their financial support between July 1st of 2022 and June 30th, 2023. So you'll want to input how many other children that your parents have that will rely on them for financial support. And then the second question is, how many other dependents? So is there anyone else that's living in your parents' household that also receives more than half of their support from your parents and will continue to receive more than half of their support between July 1st of 2022 and June 30th, 2023? All right, and then it's going to ask you about parent tax filing status. So if your parents have completed their IRS income return for the year of 2020, if you're filling this out and are a senior in high school right now, you're then going to answer the question based off of if they've completed their IRS income tax return or if there's another tax return that they've completed. It will then ask you the specific type of income tax return that your parents have filed, and it will also ask you what your parent or parents' tax filing status is according to their tax return. All of this information, if you have your parents' tax return, can be found right on the first page in the top left-hand corner. Then it will ask you if you want to link to the IRS. This is a great tool. I highly recommend it to all of our families. It will not only save you time, because what happens is the IRS tax return will actually pull in all of the information from that initial tax return that your parent or parents filed and will place the information on the FAFSA for you. Not only will it save you some time, it will also ensure that the information is accurate. Also, there is a federal verification process that some students are selected for. If your FAFSA is selected for verification by the federal government, it will ease your burden in terms of the amount of documents that you need to provide your financial aid office. So highly recommend this tool. Again, it's going to just make your life a little bit easier and save you some time. If you choose not to use the IRS data retrieval tool, or if the tool is not working for whatever reason, you will just have to input the information manually. So first, it is asking, what is your parents' adjusted gross income for 2020? And it's going to tell you based off of what form you told the FAFSA that your parent had filled out. In my case, I had placed that it was the 1040. It's going to tell you exactly on the 1040 where to find this information. And then parent income from work. So it's going to ask you about both parents and what they earned in terms of wages, salaries, tips, etc. in 2020. This can be found, and it tells you exactly where on the 1040 to find it. So you should be able to easily find that. You just have to add up a few of the lines on the 1040. So it's going to be the 1040 line 1, schedule 1, lines 3 plus 6 plus box 14. So really important to keep in mind and ask some questions to the financial aid offices if you have questions on this, but that is how you would calculate exactly what you will place in that box. And then parent questions for tax filers only. So if you had said that your parent filed a tax return, it is then going to follow up with some information and further questions. The questions are in regards to combat pay or special combat pay, student college grant and scholarship aid reported to the IRS in your parents' income. This can include things like the AmeriCorps benefits, as well as grant and scholarship portions of fellowships or assistantships. Next, it's going to ask about education credits. If your parents are filling out a 1040, which I had said on the first page that that's what my parents filled out, it's going to tell you exactly on the 1040 or any other tax document that you entered where to find that. Untaxed portions of IRA distributions and pensions. And again, it's going to tell you exactly where to find that. IRA deductions and payments to self-employment, SEP, Simple, KEOGH, and other qualified plans from the IRS form. And this again will tell you right on there where to find that information. And then finally, tax exempt interest income. And it will tell you again exactly where to find that. This can vary from tax return to tax return, but based off of the tax return that you put in on that first page where it asked you which form your parents filed, it should then generate on the FAFSA going forward exactly where to find all of this information, which line, where to look on that tax form. If you have questions on this though, as it can definitely be super confusing, we highly recommend reaching out to the financial aid office. On the last slide of this presentation, I will give you our email address so that you can send us an email, and we are happy to walk you through the process if you have questions. And then parent additional financial aid information. So the first question is that it's going to have you enter any income that may not be reported on the tax return. For instance, this first question, child support that your parents paid because of divorce or separation or as a result of a legal requirement. This would not include support for children that are in your parents' household. So if your parents included a child in their household number on the previous page, you would not include child support that parents paid to the other parent for those children. If they're already counted in your household number, then you can't include child support that you paid on this page. Earnings from work under a cooperative education program offered by a college, and then taxable earnings from a need-based employment program, such as federal work study and need-based employment portions of fellowships and assistantships. Again, this is for the parent, so just keep that in mind as you're filling it out. And then other untaxed income. Child support received for all children. So this is any child support that your parent receives from another parent on behalf of a child in their household. Housing, food, and other living allowance paid to members of the military, clergy, and others. So anything on here that falls into that category would go in that second question. And then payments to tax-deferred pension and retirement savings plans. This can be included on the W-2 form in box 12A, and it will tell you right here the codes are D, E, F, G, H, and S, but you will not include amounts reported in code DD. So that's right from the W-2 statements that your parents would have. Veterans non-education benefits such as disability, death, pension, or dependency compensation, or any VA educational work study allowances. Finally, other untaxed income not reported. This can be things such as workers' compensation or disability benefits. And then parent assets. So this is all as of today. What is your parents' total current balance of cash, savings, and checking amounts? So this is where you're going to probably need your parents' bank statements to understand what the total balance is. The second question, what is the net worth of parents' investments, including any real estate? This includes real estate that is not your parents' primary home. So the house that your parents primarily live in and that you live in should not be included in this amount. If they have a second home or any other properties, they would need to include the investment amount for those in this second question. And then as of today, what is the net worth of your parents' current businesses and or investment farms? So again, this has to be included if your parents have a farm or family business that has over 100 employees. All right, and now we're back into the student questions. So the student tax filing status. These questions are going to be the same as they were when we asked them about the parent. For many students, they're not yet at a point where they're filing taxes. So these questions may not come up and you may not need to move further. It's really going to depend on whether or not your student has filed taxes. So again, the first question, have you completed an IRS income tax return or another tax return? What income tax return did you file for 2020 if the student did in fact file one? And what is this tax filing status according to the tax return? If your student has filed taxes, again, this is going to be on the top left-hand corner of the first page of the tax return. If the student has filed taxes, they can use the IRS data retrieval tool as well. It should give them the option. If it doesn't though, or if they have not filed a tax return, you'll have to manually input any income information. So first, it's going to ask the student, what was the student's adjusted gross income for 2020? Again, just to note, because it's so important, this is the student information now. You can always keep track at the top tabs to see what questions you're asking to make sure that you're not answering any student questions about the parent or vice versa. So again, we're in the student section now. So what was the student's adjusted gross income for 2020? What was their income from work? So this, even if the student has not filed taxes, they may still have information and income from work. So this would all have to be included on here. And again, it's going to tell you exactly where on the tax return to find it or where to find it on a student's W-2. All right, so then it's going to ask the student if you filed a Schedule 1. If there's no Schedule 1 for the student's information, then it's going to simplify the path going forward for you. Then it's going to ask you, what is the amount of the income tax for 2020? If the student, again, did file taxes. It's then going to ask you again all of the questions that they asked previously to parents about the student. So again, it's combat pay, student college grant and scholarships, education credits, untaxed portions of IRA distributions, IRA deductions and payments, and tax exempt interest. For most students, they're not going to have these things just yet, but it is important to read through every question and make sure that you're answering them appropriately for every one of your students. All right, and then child support you paid due to a divorce or separation. Again, this is for the student. So if the student had a child in the household and a student was also receiving child support paid, again, just like the parents, we can only include either the child in the household or the child support that you paid for that child. Cannot do both. Earnings from work, or finally taxable earnings from a need-based employment program. Same questions as we went through with the parent in the beginning. And then student untaxed income. Again, same questions that we answer for the parent untaxed income. Child support received, housing, food, and other living allowances paid to members of military, clergy, and others. Payments to tax-deferred to pensions and retirement savings plans. Veterans non-educational benefits. Other untaxed income that's not reported. And money received or paid on your behalf that has not been reported elsewhere on this form. This can include money that you received from a parent or other person whose financial aid information is not included on this form. All right, and then student assets. It's going to ask you first, do you want to skip questions about your assets? So if the student has no assets, if they don't have a checking or savings account, if they don't have any investments, and they don't own any businesses, you can skip these questions if all of the answers to the questions would be 0. If though your student does have any of these accounts, you would not want to skip these questions and you would want to include the information about your assets. First, it's going to ask what the student's current balance of cash, savings, and checking accounts are. Then it's going to ask what the net worth value of their investments are, including real estate, but again, not your primary home. And then it's going to ask, as of today, what is the net worth of your current businesses and or investment farms? This would not include a family farm or a family business with 100 or fewer employees. So again, this is about the students now. We've answered these questions about the parent previously. Make sure you are answering these for your student. Or if you're a student, make sure you are answering them for yourselves and not for a parent. And then you're at the end. Really, it flies by. It's all questions about yourself or about your parents or about your student if you're a parent that's filling it out. So it really does go fast if you have all the appropriate documentation. It's really important. Make sure before you start the form, you have your parents and your students' 2020 taxes, W-2s, and the balances of all of their checking, savings accounts, any assets. If you have all of that to start, it's going to make the process much easier. Once you are done, it's going to give you this summary. You're not completely done yet at this point, but it's going to let you review all the information that you input. It's good to give this a once over just to make sure you didn't put any of the parent information in for the student section or vice versa, and that you didn't add an extra 0 somewhere, as that can really impact your financial aid. So all good things to look at before you submit. And then before you are going to be able to submit, it's going to ask you to read this information that you're electronically signing a federal document, that you are agreeing to the fact that all the information that you've provided is correct. And then finally, you're signing it. And it needs to be signed by both a student as well as a parent. Again, you're using those FSA IDs to electronically sign it. I would go through that, electronically sign it. And then you should be able to submit it. And then you should be really excited because you finally submitted that FAFSA and you are hopefully all done with it. In about 3 to 5 business days after you submit it, you should get an email from the FAFSA notifying you that your FAFSA form was processed. If for whatever reason you don't receive that, definitely reach out to some of the schools that you've submitted it to check and see if they have received it. If they haven't, then you'll want to go back into the FAFSA and just make sure that you didn't miss that final submission box. From there, you will get a couple different things from the FAFSA. It will first confirm that you filed it, and then you'll also receive the student aid report. The student aid report will give you what your estimated family contribution number is based off of the FAFSA. That is what the FAFSA estimates that your family can pay towards college. And then from there, you should also be able to see that it got submitted to any of the schools that you sent it to. I know that we're recording this and that we're not able to be with you as you fill out this form. So I would really encourage you, if you have questions as you're filling out the FAFSA form, or if you have submitted it and you want to check and make sure Siena's received it, send an email to our office. We're always happy to be a resource. Even if your student decides not to attend Siena, we are always there for questions. Our email address is aid@siena.edu. We're really looking forward to working with you, and we're really looking forward to seeing your FAFSAs come in. Thanks so much for taking the time with us today to fill out that FAFSA form. You have checked off another box and you've just moved one step further to getting your student a financial aid package.